Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today I thought what we would do is go over my controls in 2022. We did a video about my aircraft controls a while back and it's been a few years, so obviously a lot of things have changed when it comes to the game. You know, you've got the introduction of stuff like missiles, you've got the introduction of countermeasures, more radar options and all of these different things. So why not have a look at them once again and give you a general idea of how I play the game. Now, one of the things to mention is something that I'm going to actually reference quite a lot is the multifunction menu. And the multifunction menu is something that is available to all players. It's fantastic for people who are on console and also when it comes to even PC. Now, if you hit Y on the keyboard, it brings this up, right? So this is the multifunction menu that I'm talking about. The radar can be accessed through 1, and you can have all of the radar controls. The weaponry is accessed through 3, and then also mechanization if you want to, and also the MFD setups, which are more new to the game. So just to let you know, that's how you can do stuff like that. So if I reference the multifunction menu, that is the part that I'm talking about when looking through it. So when it comes to the controls, I mainly use simple mouse aim. I used to use more complex controls, but nowadays I try and stick to what is more general. So when people ask me my opinions on things, I can, you know, try and give them as close to a perspective as they can get. That doesn't mean that I don't have different control modes that I do use. So this is toggling control mode. What this does is it changes your control mode between simplified, realistic, and full real controls. What I will do sometimes is I will switch to full real controls with certain vehicles, and I will change a bunch of the settings when it comes to the manual engine. You can see here I have the mixture, the radiator, the oil radiator, and also the RPM control for the turbocharger, and also the auto pitch stuff. So sometimes I'll screw with this to be able to get it to a specific point, and then what I'll do is I'll switch back to mouse aim to be able to once again control the vehicle in a different way. So understand that. Generally that doesn't happen anymore though. That is only really if you want to get that extra like 2 to 5% out of your machine. If that is something you are personally interested in, just understand that the vast majority of players don't do this, so it could give you a little bit of an advantage, but also at the same time, it does mean that your engines and your vehicle as well will be harder to maintain, meaning that you'll have to worry about temps a little bit more, and also you'll have to worry about the fuel usage and all of that general stuff, and if you get it wrong, it can go catastrophically wrong, so it can take a little bit more practice than usual. Also, at the same time, you've got to remember that it's different for every vehicle. So what works for one may not work for another. And that is where it gets kind of annoying. So the hover mode is on left. One of the general things that you'll find when it comes to my controls is I use 3 sets of things. So we have the left-hand side of the keyboard, which is like the enter key to the shift key. Then we have the arrow keys, which are used for generally changing modes for airplanes. And then we have the numpad, which is generally designed for weapon selection and also radar controls, because usually you don't have to change those much on the fly. When it comes to what I do with my hands, my right hand always stays on my mouse, and then my left hand moves across the keyboard. Now, I don't have huge hands. I actually have quite tiny hands compared to the rest of my body. It's a bit weird, I know. But generally, that means that a lot of my controls are sat between shift and also M on the keyboard, because that is where my hand actually reaches to. If I reach any further, it kind of gets a little bit painful. So therefore, you know, for other people, they might have a bit more spread out controls, but for me, the vast majority of them are on the left-hand side of the keyboard, and then the other ones are much more, you know, not have to be as reactionary friendly. So, hover mode is on the left arrow key. Just like we talked about before, the arrow keys are used for changing modes for aircraft. The arrow keys themselves, you can technically put multiple different things on the same keys because not many aircraft share the same stuff. So, for example, right now, there is not a VTOL variable swept wing machine. So you can put both of those commands on one button and it'll be fine, because they will never ever contradict each other. The only thing you'll get is a little message at the bottom telling you shouldn't do that, but don't worry about it. Then we have the mouse wheel for the movement. This is on throttle axis. I think it's better for throttle axis because I know a lot of people who use zoom for the middle mouse button, but in fights, especially in dogfights, being able to slightly change your speed when it's going in or going out of a dogfight, or moving around it, is very important with those little changes that you can do, especially if you are trying to toggle flaps and make sure that you don't break stuff as you go around. Usually the way that I play is I use my mouse to look around and use my keyboard to control the aircraft. So we, for large changes or for large movements, we use the keyboard, and for minor movements you use the mouse. So using stuff like throttle axis on a mouse, generally if I'm doing a loop on somebody, what I will do is I will move the mouse as I am changing the throttle axis, so therefore we can get into a better position. Also, throttle axis itself is also on W and S for me. What you'll find is, once again, a lot of my controls are centered around the little area on the left-hand side of the keyboard. So S and W for throttle axis, hold throttle for WEP. Make sure to turn this off. Basically what this means is you don't always have to hold down the throttle axis key, so in my case W, to WEP. What it'll do is it'll do it automatically and you can let your hand rest. There's no reason to constantly hold your hand on the keyboard if you don't have to, so make sure to turn that off. And if you have throttle axis to your mouse wheel, this basically means that you will be able to just, if your engine is overgoing, or if you want to conserve some WEP on certain vehicles like the P-51H, you can always just click it back with just one simple movement of the mouse wheel. It's very easy to do. Then the simple stuff, so ailerons or roll axis, A and D, pitch axis, so elevators, Z and X, and then yaw axis is Q and E, so for rudder. Now this is a little bit odd for people when it comes to how I set up on this, but basically to give you a general idea, I should have probably set up a camera for this, so I keep my fingers on W and S as usual, so I can change throttle, and then what happens is my index finger is on D, and my finger which is next to the middle one is on A. Now if I want to use roll and elevator at the same time, I move my index finger down to X and then keep it on A, or if it's the opposite where I want to roll to the right and also go down on the elevator, which is usually not that often, my index finger stays on the D and then the middle to left finger goes on the Z. Then if I want to use the rudder at the same time as the rolling, this is where it can get a bit confusing. The middle finger goes on A, the index finger on X, and the other finger on Q. And then if I want to do the opposite, once again the opposite way around as well. So on that point, if you're doing that, if you're using all three controls at the same time, you have to do your throttle axis with your mouse, which isn't too much of an issue. But yeah, and generally the pinky, so the pinky stays on caps lock, shift, and control through all of that, because I use those for different things as well. So it can be a little bit awkward when doing stuff such as rolling and elevator at the same time, but I've made it so the vast majority of movements you do, which is generally pull to the right or pull to the left and elevator, is easy to do when it comes to my hand position. Also thrust vector we have on up and down, so once again more controls which are put towards the arrow keys, which are generally seen as not ones to kind of screw with. I usually keep that stuff on automatic, so I don't have to worry about it too much, but if I have to move it, you know, that's what we generally do. I don't have a hover height assigned, mainly because once again not a ton of VTOL aircraft in the game, and also I hardly ever use the VTOL ability. If I do use it, it is actually usually in a dogfight. So if I get somebody to overshoot with something like a Harrier, then I can pop them with the VTOL. But usually I don't, you know, bother with that too much. It's very much a control in general, which I feel like would be useful for some people, but not enough to be able to assign something unless you are a specialist in that area. The invert y-axis, I don't want to turn my controls upside down, so no need. And force feedback, I have absolutely no idea what it does, so I just keep it on. When it comes to the mechanization stuff, so this stuff, as we said, uses most of the standard keyboard things, apart from the Ignite boosters, because once again, this is something that we can easily put on the arrow keys. So the Ignite boosters goes to the up arrow key, the switch swing wing control also goes on the up arrow key, because both of those never really cross over. You don't have any variable swept wing aircraft which also have access to stuff which can help it get off the ground, because that's what boosters are. Stuff such as what you see on the Arado, for example. Like if we have a look at the Arado has these massive things which are sat on its wings to be able to get it off the ground. That is what boosters are. They're also on stuff like the Kicker, for example. You can see on these things here, these ones. So these are a bit of Rato to be able to get you off the ground, right? So that's what Ignite boosters are. It's not on a lot of vehicles, but it is on some of them. And also at the same time, the variable swept wing is also not on a lot of vehicles. So usually you don't have to worry about either of them. Because they don't ever match up with each other, so you can have them on the same control. Also, wing sweep is on left and right. Once again, this is the same controls as the hover mode. So if there is ever a variable swept wing aircraft that comes in with VTOL, then I am kind of screwed, but there isn't yet, and I highly doubt there is going to be, so you don't have to worry. When it comes to flaps, the main control I use for flaps is F. This toggle is usually from raised to combat, but can also do raised to landing if your gear are down, or if they're going down, so you've got to remember that. And that is right next to that collection of buttons that I use here to be able to push around with, so it makes it super easy. If I need more flap control, then I use the squared bracket ones, which are right next to the enter key. These ones I'd have to move my hand across, and as we talked about before, these controls are much more, okay, well, if I'm in a specific situation and it requires it, then we hit it, but it's generally something which is a little bit less needed, so we relegate it to a different part of the keyboard where the hands generally aren't. The air brake is next to the flaps, and then also the gear is at G. Sometimes this does kind of screw me up because I do sometimes hit the H button instead of the G button, or sometimes hit the G button instead of the H, and this is a bit of a problem, but it's not a huge deal as long as you can sort it out. And basically that's where my hands can stretch to, like shift to H is still pretty good. Also, thrust reversal is /num. You don't ever need thrust reversal. There's like 2 or 3 aircraft in the game that have it, and also at the same time, you hardly ever use it. So I have it on here because I used to use it in custom battles to be able to line up aircraft, so it was easy to taxi, but you don't need it. It's not required. And also, once again, drag shoot is at Alt-G. Haven't changed that from its standard one, because the drag shoot comes out automatically. So there's not many situations where you actually want to use the drag shoot without it being used automatically. Once again, it's another one of those, okay, you can maybe get 1 or 2% more efficiency out of it, but why bother? Because it's going to do it anyway. So don't worry about that. Now, weaponry is where it kind of gets interesting. When we start having a look at the different controls, because you might wonder why a lot of these are not actually lined up or are not actually used. And the reason for this is because a lot of controls in this setup actually do the same thing. So small caliber guns, large caliber guns, and additional guns. So the way that I have this all set up is on my left mouse button, I fire everything. And then if I want to do small caliber guns, so let's say we have a Spitfire and we have some 7.7s and then some 20s, I hit 1 when it comes to the control, which is the one above Q. and then I hit 2 if I want to hit the cannons. So it's very easy for me if I'm in that mode. You remember how we talked about for large maneuvers, you use the keyboard, but for minor maneuvers, you use the mouse. So the time when I would use 1 and 2 here is when I'm already on a target, and I can just do those minor maneuvers with the mouse to be able to then hit the target. Usually I would just click left mouse button, but obviously in certain vehicles, e.g. like the Ac-9T, or once again the Spitfire, or once again other vehicles like the Bf-109, sometimes I would want to do, you know, just one of the cannons and not the others. Then fire, machine gun, and cannons, there's no reason for this because these already exist, these already cover these, and then fire, primary, and secondary, these once again already cover all of these controls. So I don't need more. I don't need these controls because they're already covered by all of these. The only issue with this is sometimes you can have 2 sets of large caliber guns which will fire them at the same time. So for example, in like a BF-110, if you have an MK-103 and an MK-108, they'll fire at the same time, and obviously different muzzle velocities. But at the same time, these also wouldn't sort out that issue. So it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. So this is how I have it set up. If you wanted to make this a bit cleaner, you could actually set this one to LMB and then these ones just to 1 and 2. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter. They do the same function at the end of the day. Opening bomb bay is num0. It's another one of those things that we talked about. Everything that isn't as used as much is relegated to the right side of the keyboard. So that includes bomb bay, but then also drop bomb is at space because it's very easy if my fingers are on AWD to have my thumb on the space bar. Now I know a lot of people who use the thumb to fire their guns. I don't know how the hell they do that and how they have the control for that, but fair enough. But for me, drop bomb is on spacebar, and drop bomb series, which is actually the one that I use more, is on left control. Because there's a lot of vehicles, for example, the Vautour as a vehicle, which has access to a decent amount of bombs, but they are kind of at awkward loads. So it has access to 10 360 kilo bombs, and if you set the bomb series to a certain point, you can see here bomb series disabled. So if you set it to 4, for example, if you hit like the bomb series button instead of just the bomb button, you can drop that amount of bombs at once, and it just makes it a little bit easier to be able to do. It just means that if you are going after bases, you can work out how many bombs it takes to kill a base, or maybe half a base, no matter what you're doing, and then you just have to hit that button once instead of having to hit the other bomb button a bunch of different times. So it's just a little bit of extra control. It makes it easier to do, and it is much nicer to do, which is, you know, quite nice. So come on, Vautour, get in the air. It's the same logic behind a bunch of other things, where you're just trying to make the game a little bit easier for yourself instead of harder, and that's how it is. So you can see here we have 4 bombs on the wings. If we open bomb bays, there's some in the center. So let's just hit the standard bomb button. You can see it drops the 2 bombs on the side, right? Because the way that the Vautour works is you drop the 2 bombs at the same time on the wings twice, and then individual bombs in the center. You want to relax? But if I hit the bomb series button, you can see it drops 4 at once. And therefore, that means that I can hit 2 bases, kill 1, and then kill half of 1 on another one, and we can kind of go from there. So it makes it a little bit easier, and also I don't have to hit the button, I don't have to hit the button 8 times, I only have to hit it 3 times. So if you don't have bomb series set up, really recommend it at the end of the day. It just makes it a bit easier. For every vehicle, you can individually also set its bomb series. You do it in the screen before you enter the game. So you just set it up there. Then I have fire rockets. So I don't actually have rocket bound, and this is because what I do instead is I have it fire rocket salvo bound. So the difference between fire rocket and fire rocket salvo is if you use a salvo then and hold it down, it will fire a bunch of rockets at the same time. if you only fire the rocket salvo, if you only fire the rocket, no matter how long you hold down the button, it will only fire one set of rockets. So for me, the way I see it is if I set rocket salvo to R, I can fire one set of rockets if I tap the button, but if I want to have a prolonged setup where firing a bunch of rockets, I can hold down the button and it can fire them all off. So it's all just about control of what to do. And once again, the control is very close to that WASD, which is what we use for a lot of things. So very easy to hit rockets while you're flying with this setup. Then we also have all of the missiles. Now this can be a bit confusing, so I'll go through it basically. As you can see, so fire air-to-ground missile is space, fire air-to-air missile is MB4, weapon lock air-to-air is MB5, and drop guided bombs is space. Now you might see that my lock guided bombs is not actually bound. This does not actually mean that it doesn't work. What it means is that all I have to do is use space to be able to lock bombs. So what happens with the way that the game works right now, so let's go through it like one by one. So fire air-to-ground missiles is just space. So stuff like bullpups, stuff like things like that, I have it completely connected to bombs. So I'm either using bombs or I'm using missiles when it comes to an air-to-ground sense. This is because, in general, I don't run air-to-ground missiles and also bombs. I don't think I've ever done that. I either take one or the other, and there's not many instances where you can take both, apart from the highest tier of the game. And usually you don't want to bring both, if that is the case. If you are a person who does bring both, fair enough, but I'm not. So it's much better for me just to bring one. Now, because I don't have lock-guided bombs actually bound, what ends up happening is once you go into that screen to lock them, so with stuff like Mavericks or with stuff such as other things like the guided bombs from like the A4, for example, all you have to do is you use space. Space actually locks the bomb for you, or locks the missile for you, and then you fire it with space as well. So instead of having to tap it with different buttons, it's a 2-tap process. So tap once, hit the thing, and then tap twice, fire the thing. It's as simple as that. It works very well, and I'll show you here. So even though I don't have it bound, even though the vehicle itself doesn't have access to them, let's just bring these. Just to kind of show you what I mean. Then we'll just change it to day. Good. So let's use like the A10, for example, as an example for this, since this is one of the more recent vehicles which has access to Mavericks. So according to my controls, right, I shouldn't be able to lock onto anything because, I don't have lock actually set to anything. But if we observe taking off in this thing, which takes a little bit of time. By the way, if you haven't flown the A10, super fun to fly. So good in a bunch of different roles in the game. Not perfect, but good enough. So you can see we have the targets over there, right? And if we turn, we go into the screen. And once again, this does work for guided bombs as well. We go into this screen, we have a look, and then you press the button, and you can see we already pressed space there. So I only use space here to be able to lock on. So space, lock, fire again with space. So it's a 2-step process. All you've got to do is space, space. There you go. And it works a charm, if that wasn't like that. But you can see the first one hit both. So you don't have to actually set that button if you don't want to, because it goes off the button that you usually use to fire the thing anyway. So you can use the same button for both things, and you don't even have to assign it. So that's why I don't have it assigned when it comes to it, because it's not needed. I don't need to have it. Now, when it comes to air-to-air missiles, I do use my mouse controls. And this is something that may differ for you depending on what mouse you have. The mouse that I use has 3 buttons on the side of it. One is used for push to talk, and the other 2 I used for missiles. They used to be used for rockets and other things, but at the same time I started using vehicles where I'd bring air-to-airs and rockets, or air-to-airs and bombs, and it was becoming a bit of a mess. So instead nowadays, when it comes to the mouse buttons, the only thing I use them for is air-to-air missiles. So as I'm getting onto a target, my front button, which I have, is used to lock the seeker, and the back button is used to fire the seeker. Now it does say MB5, even though this thing only has 3 buttons. That's because it classes some of the other parts of the mouse as buttons as well. So this could easily be changed to something on the keyboard if you wanted it to, such as like Alt or Shift or Caps Lock or something like that, but it's not hugely required. It works the best, at least what I've found on the mouse. You can also do the weapon lock with the air-to-ground stuff with Alt-C. The only reason why I have this at Alt-C is because I haven't changed it. It's once again not really needed. And then drop guided bombs. I just use space. So space works, as you can see, with the setup with it as well. The next one, so you have switch primary weapons, exit select weapon mode, second weapon ripple quantity, fire countermeasures. So the only one out of these that you need, the rest, so these 2 just do this thing's job, and you don't need to switch primary weapons because you already have this stuff set up, so just use these controls if you want to. There's no point in confusing yourself, and you never need to exit weapon selection mode once you're in it. So once you're in it, don't bother with this, you don't need it. So num7 is switch secondary weapons. Now this is very useful at high tier, especially in aviation. The reason for this is because let's use the F-14 as an example, as a vehicle to use. One of the things that's needed is you need to switch between the types of weapons that you're using, depending on the situation that you're in. Now, while you may have seen some of the highlights of me using the F-14 here, you may see on the left-hand side it just says AM's 8. Well, if I hit the weapon selection mode for the secondary weapons, bang, it now changes to AIM-9H's, right? Because my weapon selection is now on. If I hit it again, then it'll change to the AIM-7F's. And then if I hit it again, it will once again toggle to the AIM-9H's. So this means, depending on what situation I'm in, I can quick switch between them while also controlling the aircraft. Now, this isn't the perfect setup. It would actually be better, in my opinion, to switch this to another button which you have available on your keyboard. And the reason for this is because I've found, while playing this thing and a few others, is this button is way too far away from my countermeasures button. They're actually on the opposite side of things. So if I'm engaging a target, I find it really hard to be able to actually hit the other side of it. So that's just a little bit of a pointer there. So this might not actually be the best setup for it. It might be worth getting a different setup, but this is the one that I use. But it's also just to demonstrate you don't need to use different. You don't need to have an exit selection one. You don't need to have a different primary one, because you don't ever use them. Once you're in the weapon selection menu, there is no reason for you to get out of it. So you've just got to remember that it exists, and once again, muscle memory kicks in. Not too much of an issue with that. So that's good. Now, the next one, fire countermeasures. So countermeasures come in like two separate things, right? So you've got fire countermeasures, which you have to keep tapping to fire everything, and then you have periodic countermeasure release, which is just countermeasures but at timed intervals. Now, I don't have fire countermeasures actually modeled, because I've got used to using periodic countermeasures and turning off my afterburner if needed. You can actually change the period that your countermeasures fire on a vehicle if you have a look at not here. If you're going into a game, and you have countermeasures on, then there will be things. I think I can actually show you just to kind of give you an idea. So if you go into a game such as this, and you have a vehicle which has access to countermeasures, you should always use periodic countermeasures over countermeasures which are just fired, because even though you can get more off in a short period of time, you also don't have to focus as much on getting the countermeasures off. Where the hell is it? Did they get rid of it? It used to be here. I don't know where it is anymore. So yeah, it used to be here, unless they've removed it. But basically, it would give you an option to be able to fire countermeasures over off separate periods, and you could just adjust those periods as you go. So if you wanted them closer, then all you have to do is tap the button once, and then it will fire them over and over and over again until you hit the button again, and then it will turn them off. So this means that you have just a little bit less control over specifically when you fire the countermeasures, but it also means that you can create kind of a trail of countermeasures behind you, which can be worse for the enemy. So you can see here, like with it on, it'll just keep firing at period intervals, and then if you hit it again, it will stop firing. So simple as that, really. So it's just easier to control than hitting countermeasures over and over and over again. So it's just makes your life easier while you're moving around. So I highly recommend using that instead of just fire countermeasure, because you can pop more countermeasures with it, and also have them at a decent period of time. One of the things to note about it, though, which is a real oddity with it, and I don't know if it's been fixed or not, but if you turn on your periodic countermeasures in one game and you die with it on, then what ends up happening is it will be automatically on in the next battle that you go into. So that pretty much means that they will just keep firing. So you just got to be careful with that. Countermeasures slaving on Ma, you could set this to the same thing if you wanted to, but it's not really required for the vast majority of stuff. And then we have your axis for aimed weapons. So this is basically how you guide your bullpups and also guide stuff such as the Nords. Once again, and also some of the Soviet things as well. So use the arrow keys for this. So if you are generally flying, you want to fire with the space bar, and then you want to move over your left hand to the arrow keys to make sure to put them in the correct place, and then also move your mouse to move like your aircraft around. So that's how I do stuff like that. So generally, when it comes to guided weapons, though, I just send them on a trajectory and then I leave and go to a different place. Toggle laser designator. This can be done with space if you're in the correct mode. If you want to do it in a third-person mode, you could set this to a different key if you wanted. You can also use the multifunction menu for this as well. And this is where the multifunction menu comes in. So for all of this stuff, all of this can be done on the multifunction menu, which is why I haven't assigned a bunch of these things. Most of it is the useful ones, in my opinion, are set to num 1, 2, and 3, which basically what that does is separate things. So to give you an idea, the F-14 that I just spaded, 1, 2, 3 is pretty useful when it comes to those specific radar settings. So number 1 changes the type of radar mode, as you can see. Switches between them. Number 2 focuses the thing or widens it depending on what type of angle you want your radar looking at. So sometimes you want this to try and focus on a target, sometimes you want a wide spread, and the last one increases the range. So that's what num 1, 2, and 3 does for me. And I think those controls are generally pretty good to use. At the same time, if you want to use any of the other controls, or you're not okay with using them, you can do them with these. You can use the multifunction menu to use all the different radar stuff. Gaijin actually put out a pretty good video recently on radar controls and how to use them and what's the differences between different radars. I'd make sure to check that out if you're more interested in how radars work at the highest tier. They're not too complicated, they just look intimidating. So for me, when it comes to radars, you need these 3 set here, num 1, 2, and 3. But the rest you don't really need set. You do need select radar target to lock and also lock on IRST on target. Both of these are very useful because they're basically how you lock targets for missiles and such. So if you are a person who wants to lock, let's say, your radar on something to fire a Sparrow, for example, or to fire an R3R or something like that, you're going to need to have this button set, the lock radar on target. This one is also very useful for doing guided bombs or doing bullpups, for example, because you can actually use this button as well to be able to lock a target on the ground, or at least for a guided bomb on the ground if you don't want to use the targeting reticle, but I think it's best to use the targeting reticle. And then horizontal radar, target Q control axis, both of these can be done in the multifunction menu. Then we have a bunch of different stuff which once again can be done in the multifunction menu, so I don't touch them. The reload guns is an arcade thing. I don't hardly ever play arcade anymore, so I had that unbound. It used to be set to R, but it would conflict with my rocket salvo button, so I just removed it. If you are an arcade player, you should have this set to something. Then toggle cannon ballistic computer and rocket computer. These two I just use in the multifunction menu. It just makes more sense to do so, since this is a quick switch between modes. There's no reason to put this stuff on the keyboard, just use the multifunction menu. Switch sight mode in the cockpit, once again, multifunction menu. Switch mission bombing target, once again, multifunction menu. The bombing target thing should only really be needed to do in the multifunction menu. The activate target point and deactivate target point can be useful with missiles and also guided bombs, but once again should be done from the reticle, just because of the fact that it will be easier to use, and you should put yourself in a position to not get hit before you start using stuff like guided bombs and also missiles. Sight stabilization and disable sight stabilization, these things are on by default, so don't screw with it. There's no need to do this. There's no need to screw with this. You just screw yourself by doing it, so don't bother. It'll just jar you and you'll be confused. When it comes to switch bombing target, this is actually something I should talk about. So there are certain machines in the game which do have some pretty interesting modes. So I think this one has it. I should check. So this has bomb CCIP and CCRP, right? Now CCIP is when it gives you the target on the ground to be able to hit targets. When it comes to other modes though, it can be slightly different. Just to kind of give you an idea, and this is kind of an important thing because I found like a lot of people don't know about this, which seems odd to me because it's a pretty standard thing. At least from what I've seen. So we'll just do this. We'll get off in our A4N and I'll show you what I mean. So you may have seen there where it talked about the bombing target stuff, and generally, a lot of people don't use it, or they should use it and don't. And there is only a few vehicles that have this, so it is very much a top tier thing. Here we go. So you can see countermeasure periods, what I was talking about before. So you can do countermeasure series, which is how many it fires at once, and then you can have periods between countermeasures. So if you want one countermeasure every 1 second, you can do 1 to 1 second. If you want 4 in 10 seconds, you can do that as well. So that's how you do the countermeasure stuff. Once again, we can do the bomb series as well. So I got into a game just to kind of show you how the CCRP works. We'll just deactivate it for now. It's not actually in weaponry, it's in the cockpit, and that's kind of my fault. But basically, the way that the CCRP works in Air Realistic and also Air Arcade and Air Sim is if you hit Y, so the multifunction menu, if you hit cockpit, and then what you can do is you can either activate a target point, so you can just do this, and then it will just put a target point wherever you want. Or what you can do is if you want it to hit a base, you can hit the switch target point, and what it'll do is it'll filter through the different bases that you can see, and then you can set up for killing one of them. Now, what is kind of cool about this setup, and since we're on an NEC map, it's going to take us a while to do it. One of the things is if you hit your bomb buttons, so just the standard bomb button or the bomb series button, which I'm doing right now, you can see that it has a bomb release permission. So this will only release a bomb if the line meets the center of the circle. And this means that you will never miss a target. You can technically lob bomb with this if you really want to. It works pretty well. But it's just an extra control, meaning that, you know, you're able to kind of turn your brain off and be able to bomb stuff if you want to. If you do want to bomb stuff in a dumb bomb way, though, you do have to cancel this and be able to, you know, do it in a different way. You know, you're going to have to cancel the target point so you can drop bombs again, otherwise you're going to need the release permission. But the main thing is, it's just a cool little feature for vehicles. But just remember, this is for vehicles which have access to CCRP. It doesn't work with vehicles that have CCIP. That just gives you the little bomb reticle and that's it, like this, that you can see. But yeah, I think it's pretty awesome. It's very much underutilized, so always check if you're playing as CCRP, so you can do stuff like this and make bombing even easier for yourself. Now, for the rest of the stuff, when it comes for the rest of the controls, some of them are obviously general controls, like tab is for scoreboard, and also tilde to change control mode. And then there's a few other ones like aerobatic smoke, open cockpit, shrugged music, you know, stuff like that, that you can see here. And then those are just like kind of legacy stuff that, you know, you can use or you don't need to use, kind of just nice to be there. Tracking camera is pretty fun, so the torpedo stuff that you can see. And then one of the most important things that is not here, which is the most important to around this place, is actually the camera control stuff. And the camera control stuff in general is very important. And this is this one right here, mouse look activation. So one of the things that has to be said about when playing aircraft is you need to have, at high tiers, a 360 view. A 360 view is required because if you don't have a 360 view, what ends up happening is you can get jumped on and die without anything going on. So you have to always be looking around and seeing what is around you. You can help this through a crew skill. The awareness crew skill will help you kind of see things behind you by giving you little red arrows everywhere around your hood, telling you where enemies are approaching from. But that isn't good enough, because then you will have reacted too late for the target coming in. So using something like mouse look activation and a zoom camera, which is right here, you can basically fly this aircraft while also looking around. If you hold C pretty much all the time, and just to give you an idea, my C button is it's lost the C key. You know, it doesn't have anything on it right now, and a lot of my other buttons don't have any of their letters on it anyway. But it's because I hold C pretty much all the time when I fly. So I use the mouse most of the time. To look around while I'm flying, and then I use A, D, X, W, and QE to be able to fly the machine. This means that as I'm moving around and looking for targets to be able to shoot, I can actually still fly the aircraft, and this is generally the setup that you do. So you have the index finger on C, then you have the middle finger on A and D, then you can move the middle finger to X and Z if you need to, and then you can move them up to Q and E as well if you want to, while still looking around. So that's something that can happen. Also at the same time, you can kind of do it while pulling. So right now I don't have my hand on the C button, so you can do stuff like this if you only need to look in one direction if you feel like it. But generally it is better to just hold C and then use it to be able to look around and react to situations as it comes. So you can see, okay, so I'm just going this way and I'm having a look around, and there's an enemy falling on me from there. So because he's coming across like this, I want to pull and then pull this way, change over to mouse control, take my hand off of the C button, because even now I'm controlling like the plane with the mouse, because I've actually activated the keyboard stuff first and hit the keyboard buttons first. It is reacting to my keyboard before it's reacting to my mouse. So even though I'm not holding C, I'm still controlling the vehicle with my keyboard. But the moment I let off the keyboard, which is now, it now is controlled by the mouse. So you can see how you can quick switch between these ideas, and it can work extremely well for the vehicle. And generally, you know, it can just be really nice to use in its general sense. So it's one of those things to think about. It does take a while to get used to, but it definitely is worth it at the end of the time, because it means that you can just have extra control of it while also, you know, looking around. So having the C button is very useful, and it's something that you are gonna really have to get used to if you want to properly play like the high echelons of jets, because there's so many missiles flying around now. You can't just look straight all the time. It just can't happen. So simple as that, really. Then also hydroplane smokescreen activations, just Alt G, cockpit lighting and open cockpit. Once again, legacy stuff. And then also at the same time, all of these things I do in the multifunction menu, so don't need controls for them. Then the instructor, I turn everything on the instructor off. The instructor is a pain. It's okay. So I should put this right. The instructor is not bad for new players because it means that you don't run into the ground if you don't want to. But at the same time, it actually restricts a lot of the things that you can do when it comes to the game. So make sure to turn these off. Toggle engine is I, simple as that. Don't turn it off when you're in jets. But generally, you know, you can turn it off and on whenever you want. And toggle prop feathering, I don't need to do this because I have it set up in full rail controls. So I just switch to the full rail control method with the button, which is here, and then go from there. So that's generally, you know, what we do. As simple as, really. So that's all my controls. You can see that a lot of them don't actually have anything assigned to them. And that's because they either contradict with other controls or I use the multifunction menu. It's a pretty simple system, it works very well, and I've used it for nearly 10 years now, and just adding stuff on top of it as we go. It works well, and hopefully going forward, you know, you can gain some insight from this. As always, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Nicholas Richardson, Elove Goat, Pyman675, Winter Scientist, Merciless Reaper, Jerry Prevolt, Megadino King, Orange Tail, Teddy, John Ryman, Universe, Ambrosius McClellan, Daniel Stanton, Moxie, B. Young, Uncle Bean, Sem Arslan, Derek R., Bareen, Lafouche, and Samuel Slick for supporting the channel.